Like literally standing on Carolot's shuffling snow off the them.
Yeah, right. You have a different relationship with that.
Different relationship.
We're going to sit you up right here. This is a little square piano made by, actually by John Kearsing, who has come to New York in 1802, and he's beginning to bring his family over. They would come between 1802 and 1804, and two of his sons were heavily into the building. Thomas and William Kearsing were into the building part of the business, and they attached themselves to a shopkeeper named George Guilfert, who had the idea of opening up a pianoforte warehouse in New York. And so he does this with imported pianos, and then he wants to sell his own pianos under his make. And so he engages Kearsing fresh off the boat to begin producing pianos under his banner, George Guilfert. And so between 1804 and about 1809, they made pianos for Guilfert, and then they had built up enough of their family business that he opens Kearsing and Son. And so it is John Kearsing with his son William. Thomas Kearsing goes off and builds on his own in New York at this time. And they would continue the business until 1818, when John Kearsing dies, and William takes over the business, runs it for a little while, and then actually goes back to England for about 25 years. So there are William Kearsing pianos to be found in England that date after his New York experience. Very unusual. Guilfert died in 1813, and that was sort of the end of the whole Guilfert concept. But a very interesting piano. About 5 of these have survived. And we're really happy to be able to show this one. They're very well made, very substantial pianos. And this one is in good restored condition. I have a few hinges that I need to replace, and then it's ready to play.
Can you play a few notes or not?
I will see if...
Well, that's okay.
It has a few notes that are working fine.
Yeah. Were these the original dust covers?
So this cover here, also known as the shade in America, or shawl decal in Europe, and it's really a way of kind of controlling how much high frequency stuff comes off the piano.
Oh, interesting.
It doesn't do very much for dust, but it has a lot of effect on the sound. So when it's properly placed and put into location, it helps make the sound more rounded.
Oh, nice.
And fulsome.
Very nice.
And almost all square pianos from about 1780 to 1810 would have had these little covers in them. A lot of them were discarded.
Yeah, sure.
They took them out to tune them, and they never put them back in, and the kids went off and used them for shields or something, so they get lost. But we're happy that this one still has his silk covered
that one,
shade
the
on it.
nuns over there has a beautiful cover.
Yes, and so young ladies in England would have made money being the ones to apply the silk. And they were called silkers, and they worked in the piano industry, putting the silk onto the fronts here and onto the top.
How does this differ, say, from an English square of the period?
It was almost identical to an English square, because John Kearsing probably was with George Detmer when he was in London, and when he comes over, he changes a few things in the design, but this has got a lot of the Detmer stamp in it, and yet it looks just like Kearsing's pianos when he starts building under his own name. This one actually also still has its cover, but Lou DeLeave has it, and he will be bringing it to me. So this is by John Wind. Originally his name would have been Went, W-E-N-T, but John Wind is in southern Pennsylvania, and we sort of think of this as a sort of a rural piano. Wind's father was an organ maker. Wind obviously trained with his father. The piano that they brought forth here about 1807 to 1809, somewhere in that, is a little bit of a throwback. It has the old overdamper construction that we find in earlier pianos, and it doesn't have the normal way of doing it, but it does have actually a pedal that'll lift the overdampers up. So an interesting concept. Otherwise, a fairly traditional 5.5 octave piano, or in this case, excuse me, this is a 5 octave. Normally they would be 5.5 or even 6 by this time. But he's building in rural Pennsylvania, and he was helped out with another guy who was good at carpentry, and a third fellow who had the money to make it go. And they worked for about 3 or 4 years building these sort of pianos. About 8 have survived, and John Watson has recently redone one that was in Charleston. So this one was one that a collector had up in the Northeast, and they were looking for a museum for it to come to, and they found us, and so we now have our own John Wind. Is one of the first pianos that Marlowe Sigal ever got, back in the late 1960s. So this is Waits and Charters, and they have come to America from probably from Clementi, and they're building on their own. And Archibald Waits, we don't know Charters' first name, but he would later go on to Baltimore and build for a little bit. It says Waits and Charters, number 19 Berkeley Street, London. But there is no number 19 Berkeley Street in London. What it was meant to say was from London.
Yeah.
And almost all the builders who were recently from London would have wanted everybody to know that they're London trained. They're actual London builders. And so this one, from about 1797, one of the earlier American pianos that we have, and very competently built. It's in need of what I would call a complete restoration, and we probably won't be doing anything on this one for some time, if ever. It's wonderful to study as it is.
Can we look inside, or is it worthwhile? Probably.
We can look inside. It's
sure. It's nice though.
Right, as we will see. Cute little overdamper construction. And pretty much a straightforward 5 octave instrument from that late 18th century.
Right. Okay. Great.
And then we do have a hand stop for dampers, and in this case the hand stop is a very conventional one. When it's engaged properly, which would be like that, then you can let the dampers on and off, fairly straightforwardly. There should be a rail over the top of the dampers here, and that rail is now missing. If you wanted to do this piano correctly, you would restore that rail so these guys don't flip up too far. This is Creghore and Babcock, and what we're talking about is the very first appearance of a Babcock on a piano. This one from about 1805, and Creghore has taken Louis Babcock, the older brother of the two Babcocks, into partnership. Young Alpheus is working in the shop, but he's not a partner yet. Louis is the partner, and so they have built this square piano, Penniman has done the watercolor. It's actually a gouache painting on the name board, which has survived very, very nicely. And it's just an absolutely lovely name board. Behind it, you will see inside, you'll see a little bracket for a music desk. If you remove the bracket, you will see written on the back of the name board the instructions to Penniman for how he wanted this thing painted.
Oh my.
And so this one contains some things that are a little bit unusual, and I like to point those out. Even though it's pretty much a conventional 5-octave piano, the dampers, it's a very interesting concept. He's got this thing set up where, as you push it forward, you raise the treble first without engaging any of the bass dampers, which usually there's 2 handles for that, one for the treble, one for the bass. This does it all in one handle, and then when you go a little bit further, then the rest of the dampers come up. So it allows the player a little more control over what's going on as they're playing. They can get the treble up first, and then they can get the bass all the way. So an interesting concept.
It's very
the
terrace.
action approach is their own to a certain extent. It's an English double action, but it doesn't look like everybody else's. And this one would have also had a shade over the top of it, very much like the Guilfert. The shade has been lost, but we have the rest of the piano.
Mm-hmm.